My son's wedding was the most expensive lie I ever walked into. They told the ushers I wasn't on the list. They told me to stand quietly in the back. But I had a small truth in my pocket, a plain gray USB, and truth doesn't wear a tuxedo. If you're listening, take a breath, grab a cup of tea and sit with me. This one might hurt, but I promise it ends with daylight. If these stories help you, consider liking and subscribing. Your support keeps me talking when others want me silent. I am Robert Whitaker, 62, carpenter who kept every splinter of wood that mattered, the sort of man who saves screws in a jar and believes in tightening the world with his hands. I raised my son Michael by measuring twice and cutting once, because nothing about life comes with extra lumber. His mother Eleanor used to say, I could fix anything, hinges, hearts, a sticky kitchen drawer, but never my silence when someone lied to me. Harvard came into our lives like a trumpet in a quiet room. It was Michael's dream, and to my surprise, the dream said yes. The letter arrived on a windy March afternoon, blue ink on white paper, the school seal pressed like a ring into wax. Michael's hands shook so hard the page rattled like a flag, and I pressed his shoulders and said, You earned it, son. We were not rich. I had a workshop, third-generation Whitaker & Son, though the & Son was more a wish than a signature. Cabinets, stair treads, built-in tables that could stand for 50 years without wobbling. The shop smelled like sawdust and coffee, the kind of smell that convinces you the world still makes sense. The men who worked for me were good men. They had mortgages and kids with orthodontist appointments. That shop paid for Little League and electricity and Christmas. I sold the shop to send Michael to Harvard. There are sentences so clean and quick you don't feel the cut until the warmth spreads. I sold the shop. Papers in a bank office, handshakes, a polite congratulations from a man who had never once lifted a 2x4. I told the crew first. I told them early enough to find other work. I gave out my whole savings as severance, because decency isn't a line item. It's the only thing you get to keep when the ledger is empty. Then I watched my name come down from the sign I had painted with my father, and I drove home with my hands on the wheel at 10 and 2 like a student driver, because grief makes teenagers of us all. Harvard taught my son the language I didn't speak. He called less. His words grew efficient like corporate memos. Busy dad, midterms, networking event, consulting offer. Eleanor passed 2 years later, soft as paper, and the house went quiet in a new way. Grief like sawdust gets everywhere, your coffee, your pockets, the cuffs of your jeans, but you still sweep every night, pretend tomorrow will look cleaner. Michael met Victoria during his 3rd year of law school. She was beautiful, a shape drawn by a careful hand. Her father, Judge Harrison, had a voice like a verdict and a handshake that said the rules were different for his friends. Victoria smiled with all her teeth. When she shook my hand, I felt a small distance, as if we were standing on opposite sides of a very clean window. They moved fast as beautiful people and ambitious plans do. Engagement photos in a botanical garden, a ring the size of a new moon. There was a website for the wedding with scrolling photos and a registry that cost more than my first truck. I clicked yes on the RSVP and bought a suit. Old men buying suits look like they're apologizing to the mirror. But I wanted to look like a father. I wanted, if only for one afternoon, to look like someone who belonged in the photos. 2 weeks before the wedding, an envelope arrived that was not an invitation. It was a letter from a bank with my house on it. My house is collateral for a line of credit I had not asked for. The signature at the bottom was mine, except it wasn't. My R was too perfect. My T was crossed clean. My signature, after 40 years of lumber and invoices, looks like someone's heart rate spikes and slumps because life does that to your hand. The letter said the funds had been approved and transferred to an account with Michael's name on it, and this part made my mouth taste like copper Victorias. I drove to the branch. The manager wore cufflinks that reflected my face the way a funhouse mirror does, wider, older, impossible. He said calmly that the signature was verified by a notary public, and that the line of credit was already drawn down for wedding expenses, and a bridge purchase, which turned out to be a deposit on a condo. The notary's stamp was crisp and clean. I asked if the notary had seen me sign. He said he couldn't disclose client specifics, but he tapped the stamp with a finger, as if to say, this is the part that matters. I am a carpenter. When something doesn't sit right, I measure again. I went home and looked through every paper we had. In a cigar box, I keep the things that prove you were here. Eleanor's recipe cards, Michael's first report card, the mortgage deed we paid off the hard way, 1 month at a time. My signature wandered and wobbled across the years, but it always had a certain slope, a certain fall at the end, like a man descending a steep hill and finding his balance late. The bank signature looked like a fresh graduate in a new suit, enthusiastic and false. I called Michael. He didn't pick up. I texted, "We need to talk. Important." He texted back, "Rehearsal dinner." I wrote again. Someone forged my signature. He wrote, "Dad, this is not a good time." Then nothing. Silence is a kind of sentence. It has a subject and a verb, and the verb is always leave. That night I couldn't sleep. I made tea, I watched the porch light draw a small pond on the steps, and I remembered a day when Michael was 8. I had made him a wooden airplane with a rubber band propeller, and he said, solemn as a judge, "Dad, it flies because you love it." He said it like he had discovered gravity. I taped that sentence to the inside of my toolbox. Love is the only thing that makes heavy things fly. I called a friend who knows more about computers than I ever will. He's a neighbor, Anthony, who works in IT for the city. I asked him a question I never thought I'd ask: can a signature be forged in a way that fools a bank? He said yes. He said there are apps, there are scanners, there are notaries who stamp whatever you put in front of them if the check clears. He came over. We made a plan. I would go to the wedding. I would give my son the chance to tell me the truth with his mouth, not his silence. But if the truth didn't come, I would bring it myself. And so we arrive in the wedding day, a church with a steeple like a finger pointing at heaven, as if to say, keep your voice down. White flowers, white aisle runner, white cake. The ushers wore black ties, and the bridesmaids wore a color with a name that sounded like a dessert. The organist was practicing Ave Maria, and I could feel the notes in my chest like a second heartbeat. I straightened my thrift store tie in a window and saw Eleanor behind me for just a blink. She would have said, "Be brave and be kind," in that order. I grew up in a house that believed in work. My father kept shop hours even when there was no order on the bench. We didn't sit down to dinner until the sweepings were in the bin and the planes were oiled. He taught me that character is what you do when nobody is looking, and craftsmanship is what you do when everybody looks too closely. We were never rich, but our tables didn't wobble. Eleanor taught me the other half, that love is an action. She would pack lunches with a note even on the days we were arguing. She kept a jar for small luxuries movie tickets, a surprise slice of pie at Mel's Diner a beach day in October when the tourists had gone home. When Michael came along, we were already in our 40s. He was our late miracle. I was a soft parent and Eleanor was stern, which is another way of saying we did the best we could with the time we had. Michael was a bright boy. He liked the shop when it made toys and hated it when it made sawdust that stuck to his socks. He was embarrassed when my truck backfired in the drop-off lane. He rolled his eyes at my flannel shirts. I took it personally, the way fathers do, until I remembered being 17 and thinking my father's hands looked like maps to countries I didn't want to visit. The job of a parent is to be patient with who your kid is before the world is. The day I decided to sell the shop feels like a scene from a movie where the music gets quiet so you can hear the papers slide across the table. The buyer was kind in the way men with money can afford to be. He told me he admired my work. He told me the shop would keep its name. He said the word legacy like it had his picture in the dictionary. I signed. I shook hands. I went to the shop one last time and stood in an empty room that smelled like everything I'd ever built. I put my palm on the workbench and felt the scars and burn marks and the little carved R that my father had made with a pocket knife in 1979 when the workbench was new. Then I locked the door and put the key in an envelope for a stranger. Harvard took Michael far away in inches, the distance between a call and no call, between sending photos and forgetting to. He came home for breaks with words like cohort and case study and equity. These are fine words, but they are not ours. The first Christmas he brought Victoria, and she was polite to the point of cruelty. She walked through our house like a realtor. She complimented the molding and asked if the wiring was up to code. She stood in the kitchen and said, "Have you considered an open concept? I considered an open door." I learned slowly not to take offense at what young people value. They want speed because time is the only thing they don't believe in losing yet. I told myself this when Michael corrected my grammar at dinner, when Victoria put her napkin on the table and said that the wine had notes of something I'd never tasted in my life. I tried. I tried the way an old dog tries to like thunder. You don't have to enjoy it, you just have to bear it. I kept the house paid. I kept the grass cut. I brought Eleanor flowers on Fridays even after she was gone yellow mums because they looked like laughter in a vase. I thought that love like the old oak at the corner would keep standing because it always had. Love is not a tree. Love is a thing you build every day or it rots. The first time I suspected Victoria was when a message popped up on Michael's iPad while he was in the shower. I wasn't snooping. I was cleaning up the coffee table and the screen lit with a preview. He'll never know. You said the notary's chill. I put the iPad down like it was hot. When Michael came back hair wet, he saw my face and said, "Dad, don't," which is a sentence that means everything and nothing. Don't read, don't ask, don't make me tell you the truth I didn't push. That is my flaw and my virtue. I want my son to confess more than I want to catch him. 2 weeks later, the bank letter arrived and the world turned loud. Conflict. The wedding betrayal, 3,500 words. The church was full of people who looked like they had decided long ago never to sweat. The ushers checked names on iPads. The florist had made the world smell like a hotel lobby. The photographer was arranging groomsmen like chess pieces. When I approached the doors, the usher stepped in front of me with a smile he had practiced in a mirror. "Sir, guests only. I built the life he's ashamed of," I said quietly enough to be civil and loudly enough to be heard, "and I'll not be silent." From within the vestibule, Victoria appeared, a white dress with a train that had a more secure future than my retirement. Her hair was a color people pay for, and her eyes were bright with the certainty that the rules are for other people. She saw me and her mouth performed a smile. "Oh, Mr. Whitaker," she sang, sweet as frosting. "We're so lucky Michael has you. You raised a gentleman." The compliment was a knife that thought it was a flower. I nodded. "A gentleman knows what to do with a lie," I said. She blinked. Somewhere behind her, a woman in a headset gestured at a clock like it had offended her personally. Michael arrived a moment later in a tux that looked rented from a future I didn't recognize. He glanced at me, then at Victoria, then at the floor. "Dad," he said almost kindly. "We're about to start. There's a seat for you in the back." He was trying to manage me like an unexpected storm. A back row seat for the man who sold a life so his son could rent a nicer one. I reached into my pocket and felt the small, cool rectangle of the USB Anthony had prepared. On it was a careful compilation screenshots, emails, a scan of the bank letter, and because God is nothing if not thorough, a video. Anthony had found metadata tied to a private cloud folder that Victoria used to share documents with a friend. People hide things where they think they are too boring to be looked at. The file in that folder had a name like a shopping list. Inside it was a screen recording of her coaching Michael on how to replicate my signature with a tablet and stylus. She laughed when he got the R2 round. "Make it tired," she said. "Make it look like it wishes it were a nap." "Michael," I said, "did you put a lien on my house?" I didn't shout. I didn't tremble. It was a measure 2 times question. He stared at the floor like it might give him a better line. "Dad, not now." Victoria slid between us, wearing a smile that had never met an honest day's work, Mr. Whitaker, the ceremony. "The truth doesn't need a tuxedo," I said. "It walks in naked and still burns." A hush began in one corner and spread as hushes do. The ushers sensed that whatever was happening was bigger than them. The organist's practice notes died away. Someone said, "Is that his father?" as if the answer might change the weather. Judge Harrison arrived like a headline. He was tall and silver and wore a suit that understood power. "Is there a problem?" he asked, as if the very question solved it. He put a hand on Michael's shoulder that said, "You belong to my story now." "There is," I said, and for the first time that day, Michael met my eyes. I held them. A line of credit, a forged signature, my house. The judge gave a gracious half smile that could have run for office. "Sir, with respect, this is a happy day. Whatever misunderstanding you have, would you like to see the misunderstanding?" I asked, and I took out the USB. In a sensible world, there would have been a quiet conversation in a small office. In this world, the AV team had already set up a projector for a slideshow of the couple's history, and the best man was a whiz with inputs. In less than 2 minutes, the slideshow was no longer a tour of beach sunsets and college formals. It was an inbox. It was a folder tree. It was a cursor opening a file with a boring name and a scandalous heart. The screen showed Victoria's hands manicured, tapping a tablet as Michael traced my signature. Her voice clear, bright, unhurried, saying, "Make it tired." The room did not gasp all at once the way movies do. Shock moves like a wave. The first row blinked. The second row murmured. The third row whispered, "Oh my God." and the back row took out their phones. Victoria shouted, "This is fake lies!" Her voice cracked on lies. She turned to the technician as if outrage were a remote control. I answered without raising mine. Truth doesn't need a tuxedo. Michael staggered under the weight of what he'd done without moving his feet. He looked at me the way a man looks at a firefighter at the charred ruins of a house he lit himself. There was the shame and the gratitude, and the question of whether he could still be forgiven and whether he deserved to be. He reached toward me and then toward Victoria, and then his hands hung like tools no one had taught him to use. The judge did not blink. He took 2 long steps forward and stood so near I could smell his cologne, which was the smell of old wood and new money. "You think tonight ruined my daughter," he said softly for me and loudly enough for everyone. "I own judges. I own banks." His smile was a knife without fingerprints. "You just declared war, old man." Every camera in every phone had found us by then. I could feel 1,000 tiny eyes recording the moment a carpenter argued with a courthouse. Anthony had anticipated the living museum of modern humiliation and had prepared for it. The video had an overlay timestamp and a second confirming window that showed the date and IP address of the capture. Our insurance against the word deep fake was not perfect, but it was honest, the best we could do without $1 million. "Michael," I said, keeping my eyes on the judge, "is there anything you want to say to me before we go any further?" Michael's voice was smaller than the tux. "Dad, I'm sorry." He said it like it was the last piece of wood left in the pile, and he didn't know what it could be turned into. He turned to the guests to the ceiling, as if heaven might provide an index. Then he turned to Victoria. "Don't you dare!" she hissed, the frosting gone. "Do you want a career? Because this is how you lose one." She looked back at her father, and he nodded like a banker approving a loan. Michael looked at me, and then at the screen where his hand on another day had tried to be mine. Someone in the back whispered, "Is this part of it?" Humor, when frightened, tries to pretend everything is a rehearsal. The officiant cleared his throat as if anyone cared. The florist cried. The best man suggested we take 5. The photographer, God bless him, kept shooting because the only thing more lucrative than a wedding is a scandal at one. The organist played the same warm-up scale with the determination of a man who believes in finishing what he started. "Turn it off," the judge said. The technician looked at me. I shook my head. "Leave it," I said. "Let them hear her say, 'Make it tired.'" I wanted the sentence to live in the room the way the vows would have. I wanted a record. I wanted the truth to have witnesses, not just views. Victoria lunged for the laptop, and Anthony, who had wandered in by then with the kind of face men wear when they intend to be helpful and invisible, moved like a shortstop and pulled it away with a sorry reflex. "Ma'am," he said, "please don't touch the equipment." He said it like a man at a city council meeting. Calm, firm, not impressed by diamonds. "Michael," I said, "did you put my house at risk?" He nodded, one of those small nods that is really a dive. Victoria said. He swallowed the end of the sentence like a nail. "Michael," the judge said in that courtroom voice, "do not answer that." Anthony brought up a second window. Emails, dates, a copy of the notary stamp with a mismatch in the registration number that Anthony had found by calling the state database at 2 a.m. The stamp in the file used a number belonging to a notary who had retired the year before. It was a forgery of a forgery. The kind of mistake you make when you think the rules are a trick and the trick belongs to you. "Turn it off," the judge repeated, and now his voice was less velvet, more gravel. 2 men who were either ushers or interns moved forward like uncertainty with ties. Michael's best friend, who had been carefully pretending to be only a friend and not a lawyer, put a hand on Michael's shoulder. "We should pause the ceremony," he said, "because there are sentences that keep people out of prison." Victoria tried another tack. She turned to me with a sorrow that would have won awards if it had been true. "Mr. Whitaker, we did this for the future. We needed the condo for Michael's firm placement. We planned to refinance after the wedding. You would have been fine. I have built stairs in houses where children will fall, and I have built tables where arguments will end. I know the difference between architecture and excuse. You did it," I said, "because you believed you could." The church breathed in flowers and money. The ushers held iPads like shields. When I reached the vestibule, the usher smiled the way people smile at broken vending machines. "Sir, guests only." "I built the life he's ashamed of," I said, soft but not small. "I won't be silent." Victoria appeared silk in certainty. She wore a smile that had never met an honest day's work. "Oh, Mr. Whitaker," she said, frosting on glass, "we're so lucky Michael has you. You raised a gentleman." "A gentleman knows what to do with a lie," I said. Michael stepped in tuxedo, trying to upgrade his courage. "Dad, not now. Please, there's a seat for you in the back." I touched the gray USB in my pocket. Metal is honest. It holds what you put in it without opinions. "Michael," I asked, "did you put a lien on my house?" He looked at the floor like it had answers printed on it. "Dad, this isn't the time." The organist's warm-up notes hesitated and fell quiet. A wedding planner gestured at a clock with the urgency of a flight controller. Someone in the third pew whispered, "Is that his father?" Judge Harrison arrived with the weather of a headline. Silver hair, courtroom voice, handshake like a contract you don't get to read. "Is there a problem?" he asked, as if the question itself solved it. "There is," I said. "A forged signature, a line of credit, my house." He gave me a courteous smile that could run for office. "Sir, with respect, this is a happy day. Whatever misunderstanding you have, would you like to see the misunderstanding?" The AV was already set for a slideshow. The best man, a tech hobbyist with good intentions and shaky boundaries, plugged the laptop into the projector. The screen bloomed white, then folders, then a cursor moving through a directory too neat for real life. The video began a screen recording of a tablet, Victoria's manicured hands, a bank portal, a PDF, the crisp counterfeit of my name. "This is fake," Victoria's voice cracked on lies. "Turn it off." "The truth doesn't need a tuxedo," I said. "It walks in naked and still burns." Gasps don't happen all at once. They ripple. First pew stiffens. Second pew murmurs. The back row raises phones. Michael's hands hung at his sides like tools no one taught him to use. He glanced at the judge. The judge didn't blink. "Enough," Harrison said. "This spectacle ends now." His eyes slid to the tech. "Off." "Leave it," I told the tech. "Let them hear her say 'make it tired.'" On the speakers, her voice. "Use the one from last week." His R looks shakier. "We need it to look tired." The room changed shape. Belief moved seats. Michael swallowed. "Dad, she said it was standard paperwork," I thought. "Don't act innocent," Victoria hissed. "You knew we needed this." "Needed my house?" I asked. Needed a lie dressed like permission. The judge stepped closer until his cologne smelled like new money in an old library. "Turn it off." The best man's fingers hovered. The cursor trembled. "Hold it," said a woman's voice, thin, urgent, familiar to Victoria. Heads turned. At the aisle's edge stood a young woman in a bridesmaid's dress, a shade shy of blush. Her hands shook around a clutch bag she clutched like a life jacket. Anna, Victoria warned, smiling with her teeth. "Sit down." Anna, Victoria's younger sister, didn't sit. "I can't," she said, breathless. "I can't do this. She made me bring papers to a copy shop. She said it was for insurance because Mr. Whitaker forgets things." Her eyes landed on me and softened. "You didn't forget." I'm sorry." Phones rose higher. The room tilted toward the girl like a field toward rain. "You're confused," the judge said smoothly. "Nerves. Don't embarrass yourself." Anna shook her head. The notary, he wasn't real. He stamped whatever was put in front of him. She paid him in cash. Victoria's smile imploded. "You don't know what you're saying." "I do." Anna dug into her clutch. Paper whispered out a receipt from a strip mall copy center, a photo of a notary stamp with a registration number. "He used this number," she said. "But your friend said it belongs to someone retired." All the oxygen in the room went somewhere else. The judge's jaw flexed. Michael stared at the screen like a man reading his own autopsy. "Turn it off," Harrison repeated, less velvet now, more gravel. Two ushers' boys dressed like decisions moved. "Wait!" Victoria snapped, pivoting to rage, the refuge of the discovered. She lunged for the laptop fast enough to make the tech flinch. The screen went black. For a second, the room thought it had woken from a bad dream. Relief rose like steam. "Check the USB," the judge instructed calmly. "Maybe it came loose." The best man pulled the device, his brows knit. This isn't the same drive." Every head in the room swiveled. The drive in his hand was sleek and branded. The one I had given him was plain gray, a carpenter's kind of tool. "Security," the judge said to nobody in particular, and everybody at once, "escort this gentleman out." A hand touched my elbow. "Anthony." My neighbor, eyes steady. "We expected this," he whispered. He lifted my tie. Taped behind the lining was a second USB identical to the first, nicked at one corner like a scar, so I could tell it from a twin. He had insisted on redundancy the way a man who fixes broken systems insists on backups, one in the pocket, one in the tie, one in the car. We had not needed the one in the car, yet. "Use this," I said to the tech. My voice was a level on a long board. The judge barked a laugh meant to shrink the room. Now we're doing magic tricks. No, Anthony said pleasantly. Checksums. He pointed to a tiny code scrawled on a sticky note. He verified the file's integrity this morning. If the hash matches, it's the same video. If not, I'll unplug it myself. Hash, someone repeated as if we were ordering breakfast. Digital fingerprint, Anthony translated. If even one frame had been edited, it would show. The tech plugged in the second drive. The screen blinked. The file opened. The hash matched. The video rolled. Victoria's tablet again. Make it tired. The cursor glided. The forged R smiled in its counterfeit confidence. Stop, Michael said suddenly to no one and everyone. The word rang. He stepped forward. It's true. He didn't look at the judge. He looked at me. I did it. We did it. The room didn't exhale. It waited to learn what breathing would cost. Victoria pivoted. You want to throw your life away? For him. She spit him like a seed. My father can make this disappear. Can he make my father's name real again? Michael's voice broke where boys' voices break and never fully heal. Harrison's smile thinned. Mr. Whitaker, he said, courtroom measured, you are making a spectacle of grief. If you persist, we will respond appropriately. You already did, I said. This is the response. A murmur rose, the sound of people recalculating their alliances. The officiant coughed like a man practicing being useful. The florist cried into a ribbon. The photographer, bless capitalism, kept shooting. Play the rest, Anthony told the tech. There's audio. Audio. Victoria's face went bloodless. What audio? The clip shifted split screen now. On one side the tablet, on the other a waveform pulsing under a timestamp, a recorded call. Michael's voice younger by a week. Are you sure this won't come back on us? Victoria's voice sweetened with certainty. Stop asking nervous questions. Your dad signs like a drunk spider. No one will care. A beat. We'll refinance after the wedding. He'll be fine. There are sentences that turn rooms. That one did. Not because it was legally decisive, not yet, but because it was morally plain, the kind of plain people remember in cars on the way home. Enough, the judge said, but softer, calculating. He scanned the crowd, not for sympathy, but for leverage. Michael, I said, tell me the truth fully. I can't pull you out of a hole if you keep digging. He faced me. His eyes were the eyes of a boy holding his first splinter. We needed a down payment, he said. Her father, he wanted a specific building, a specific unit of view. I told myself it was temporary, that I'd pay it back with my signing bonus, that you'd be proud when you saw how fast I was moving. Proud of what I asked. Speed isn't virtue. You can drive very quickly off a cliff. He nodded like a man who finally sees where the road ends. I'm sorry, Dad. Victoria laughed low. You think sorry fixes title? Anna flinched at the sound of her sister's voice. Vicky, stop. Sit down, Victoria snapped, power fraying. Let her speak, I said. Anna looked at the judge, at Michael, at me. She told me to say I delivered documents for a family emergency, Anna whispered. That it was kinder not to bother you with details. Her eyes found the screen. She said the notary was a friend. He stamped without asking. Defamation. Harrison announced, volume up again. My daughter will not be smeared. It's not defamation if it's true, Anthony replied, almost cheerful. But that's for court. Today is about sunlight. You, Harrison, began. And then did the thing men do when force fails. He threatened process. Every phone recording in this room is a violation. This venue will be sued. You will be sued. The projectionist will be sued. A voice from midway down the hall cut through the performance. Sue me first, said a woman in a navy blouse and name badge, Latoya, Meadow Copy Center. She stepped into the aisle, card in hand. I saw her, she said, nodding toward Victoria. Twice last week. She had you on speaker, Mr. Michael. I remember because she called you sweetheart, and then told you not to text the plan. Phone calls only. We keep camera footage to stop shoplifting. I pulled the clips when I heard the notary number didn't match. I brought them with me. She lifted a small thumb drive attached to a plastic lanyard. I'm on break, she added almost apologetically. Figured I'd swing by. It's 2 blocks away. The guests laughed, not because it was funny, but because relief sometimes wears the face of a woman on her lunch break. The judge recalculated again. You could see it in the pupils how to turn the wind. Ma'am, he said, do you understand the legal implications? I understand receipts, Latoya said, and cameras, and the truth. The tech looked at me. I nodded. He plugged in the thumb drive. A grainy clip filled the screen. Victoria at the counter, sunglasses perched like armor. Anna beside her, small, worried. The audio was thin, but a clerk's mic caught the important part. No text. Phone call only, Victoria said on the video, finger tapping the glass like a metronome, and used the older sample. His hand shakes more. The room didn't gasp. It decided. "That's enough," Michael said again louder. "I'm done." He turned to the judge, to Victoria, to the room. "I will go to the bank. I will unwind whatever can be unwound. If I have to sell the ring, I will." He looked at me last. "I will fix this." "You will start," I said. "Fixing takes longer than breaking." Victoria's face calcified. "You're finished," she told Michael, each word a hammer. "My father will make sure." "My father," Michael said quietly, "is standing over there." He pointed at me. It was not a flourish. It was a correction. A brittle silence fell, the kind that cuts. The officiant cleared his throat. "Perhaps a brief recess." "No," Harrison said. His voice gathered the room the way a rip current gathers swimmers. "This wedding is postponed. Everyone out." He thought the word postponed would control the narrative. It didn't. It wrote a new one. People stood, some in sympathy, some in schadenfreude, all in motion. Phones hummed like insects. The florist sobbed into hydrangeas. The organist began to play the same 5 notes he had practiced all morning, because finishing what you started is a kind of prayer. "Michael," I said, as the crowd thinned, "there will be consequences." "I know," he said. "I just hope they're ours." Victoria wanted the last word. "People like her always do." "You'll regret this," she hissed at me, wedding veneer flaking off. "You think exposing this made you strong?" "No," I said. "It made me honest." The judge leaned in close enough that my tie ticked his lapel. "You think tonight ruined my daughter?" he murmured, for me and for the room which had learned to listen. "I own judges. I own banks. You declared war, old man." "Then I'll build in war," I said. "I know how to make stairs in a house that's on fire." Anthony touched my shoulder, a small nod, a promise of logistics. Latoya tucked her badge back into her blouse and said, "If y'all need those clips in an email, I can send them." Anna cried quietly into a napkin. And Michael, my son, stood where the aisle begins and looked at me like a man who had finally found the one solid step in a room full of traps. "Dad," he said, and this time there was no tucks in his voice. "Thank you." I didn't answer. Not yet. There is a kind of forgiveness that waits on the porch until the house is safe to enter. I had it in my pocket like a key. I was not ready to turn it, but I was ready to carry it home. Reflection. Inner emotions, 1,200 words. Do not think I enjoyed it. There is a myth that truth tastes sweet to the one who speaks it. It doesn't. Truth is a medicine that remembers what hurt you. As the video flickered on the white cloth and the room's temperature tried to find itself, I felt Eleanor standing in my ribs like scaffolding. I thought of the night Michael was born, how the nurse put him in my hands and how those hands shook, even though I had framed a house that summer without a level because I could feel it in my bones. I thought of his first day of kindergarten, the way the backpack looked like a parachute. I thought of his last day at the shop when he was 16 and too busy to sweep, when he said, without cruelty, "This isn't my life, Dad." The truth of that sentence didn't bruise until later. There is a photo from when Eleanor was sick, her head wrapped in a scarf the color of lemons, her smile tired and bright. Michael is beside her holding a bowl of soup like it's an investment. I used to stare at that photo and count the things we did right, soup scarves staying. Love is mostly staying, but love is also leaving when the house is burning and finding water and coming back with it. My son had left me in a burning house and taken the hose. I wanted to put my hand on his shoulder and tell him there is a world after the world you built wrong, that men have survived worse mistakes than this by kneeling in their ruin and building again. But he wasn't kneeling yet. He was still trying to decide whether the floor was lava or law. "Stop," Michael said suddenly to no one and everyone. The word was small and honest. He stepped forward and faced the room. "I'm sorry," he said, and it echoed because apology is louder than music when you mean it. He turned to me. "Dad, I'm sorry." I nodded. There is a kind of forgiveness that walks ahead of the apology and waits on the porch. I had it in my pocket like a key. I wasn't ready to hand it over, but I was ready to admit it existed. Victoria hissed Michael. The judge said, "Counsel." The officiant wondered if the deposit was refundable. The guests did math about their own lives. Anthony hovered at the laptop like a referee at a fight no one wanted to stop because it was finally fair. "Dad," Michael said, "I will fix this." "You will," I said, "but not today. Today you will tell the truth." He swallowed. I signed a loan using a forged signature. I used my father's house as collateral. He looked at Victoria. We did. Victoria's mouth opened and closed like a suit's cufflink. The judge stepped forward, and his shadow touched all of us. "This is over," he said to the room, and the room, being a coward, believed him. Off. Anthony tapped a key, and the screen went black. Not because the judge said so, but because the video had ended where Anthony had cut it. We had chosen the clip carefully. Enough to prove, not enough to end every future. There are battles you win by not destroying the field you must walk home across. Michael approached me like he was approaching a grave in a garden. "I will go to the bank," he said. "I will unwind the line. I will give back the money. I will sell the ring if I have to." "Start with the truth," I said. "Everything good begins there." The judge did not retreat. Men who build empires out of favors are not used to being asked for receipts. He looked past me to the gathered faces and raised his voice the way a man raises a flag. "This is slander," he announced. "There will be consequences." He said consequences the way a weatherman says flood. A man in a gray suit stood up from the third row. He had the calm of someone who is tired of being polite. "Your Honor," he said with less respect than the words advertised. "My name is Edward Blake. I represent a buyer who wired a down payment to Michael Harrison for a condo closing contingent on clear title from this gentleman's house." He nodded at me. "We were promised documents within 2 weeks. That money is gone." The room shifted its attention like a school of fish. The judge's mouth went tight. Victoria's face lost color and found honesty. Michael put a hand over his eyes as if he could hide in there. And Edward added, "I have the contract and the wire confirmation." He held up a folder thinner than a conscience, and the room leaned toward it, the way people always lean toward paper that might save them. The judge took a step and Edward took a step, and for a moment they were 2 trains on the same track headed for the same bridge. The officiant looked for God in a script. He was not there. The gallery rustled. Phones went higher. The world took notes. Dad Michael whispered at my shoulder so quietly that only the part of me that had learned his voice before he learned his name could hear it. "If he's right, they'll bury us alive in court. Then we'll learn to grow in the dark," I said, "and we'll still find the light." If you were standing where I stood, if it was your child at the altar, would you keep the peace and stay silent, or crash the wedding with the truth? Tell me in the comments. And if this story kept you company, like and subscribe. I'll see you in the next one. Take care out there. Thank you for watching.